All right, what's going on, everyone? This is Zen here from Zen Multiverse, and I hope you're having a phenomenal day. So, today we are talking about the rise and fall of the MCU, or the supposed fall, right? I think a lot of us have watched the MCU starting with Iron Man all the way up to Avengers Endgame, and our expectations are very high, and for good reason, right? There was a big build-up over the years that allowed us to get to know characters, see the introduction of storylines, but also to be able to connect on a different level. Now, the MCU has been able to do something that's quite phenomenal, and that's bring in folks who don't normally read comic books to be able to have this introduction to these superheroes and villains and concepts and storylines and things of that nature. But I think right now there's been a big shift, and the big shift that I'm speaking about happens to be the attention span. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about, and one of them happens to be the pandemic. Now, the pandemic was something that was unexpected for the whole entire world. And when talking about the MCU, they had a lot of projects and also story plot lines that were literally just planned to go uninterrupted. And when it was interrupted, things had to change. Storylines had to change. Recasting had to happen. Movies that were supposed to come out came out a lot later or came out in order that wasn't originally planned. A lot of people do forget about that. So we're currently in phase four of the MCU, and there's a lot of movies that seem to be out of the mix or don't really make sense for where they're going into the MCU. Or we were able to see things that didn't truly make sense. And we could start off with Scarlet, not Scarlet Witch, but Black Widow. The Widow movie was an origin-based story about the Black Widow, and we got to see her family and basically who she became and how she became it. But a lot of people questioned, well, we saw her perish at the end of Avengers Endgame. Why would they show a movie about her origin story now? Now, this led into a whole lot of different variables, right? When it came to the pandemic and also introduction to movies and also the decline of viewership. A lot of folks during the pandemic didn't have access to what they normally did, such as going to the movies and things of that nature. So they shifted their attention to a lot of home-based activities, right? And some of them happen to be streaming services. And the streaming services allow them to have what I would say more instant gratification that they would normally have if they were going to the movies. Now, of course, this is something that we had prior to the pandemic, but it did shift the attention span when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in speaking about long-term projects, and it takes a long time to get to know a specific character. Now, I know I'm kind of jumping around left and right and up and down and ABCD and all of that jazz, but I want you all to understand that the MCU did try, right? They did try their best in keeping everyone's attention span, but also dealing with the unknown, right? And when things would go back to the status quo. Now, not just that, we also have actors that passed away, right? Um, Sending all my energy and good vibes to the family of Chadwick Boseman. He passed away, and originally he was supposed to continue to be the Black Panther, but that shifted, right? That whole movie shifted around. Now, while I did watch the movie and I enjoyed it, you could tell that they were pressed. They were pressed to do something to please the audience, but also give respect at the same time. A lot of folks said, well, they could just recast him, and a lot of folks were saying, well, that's disrespectful. And a lot of folks were saying they should just recast him, right? You they couldn't really win, but they tried their best. So when you think about things of that nature, the pandemic, the passing of characters, everything got shifted around, right? And they were pressed to impress. But what I felt like happened is that we got a lot of quantity over quality. And this is because, well, they were making a whole lot more money, but also they wanted to hit a wider viewership. Now, because we have this quantity over quality, and what we remembered from the first phase, all the way building up to Avengers Endgame, people were looking for a highly invested story with characters that they feel some kind of kinship to. But because the attention span did change, Marvel was trying to just introduce characters left and right, and also trying to get a broader audience, right? And for us, I think a lot of people didn't notice that their attention spans did shift. And because we didn't have characters that we used to know and love after Avengers Endgame, we didn't care for the brand new characters. And some of these brand new characters were absolutely amazing. Now, I'm not just making excuses for the MCU. There are a lot of projects that I have seen so far that either there's no more talk about, some did really well, or the interconnectivity doesn't really lend itself to something where we're all super excited for. Or the MCU thought it would be okay to just, just throw in a whole bunch of cameos in order to grab everyone's attention and to please the fans. But what ended up happening was it was instant gratification for the moment. The overall synopsis for a movie was then, brought down to a point where they believed that this was a waste of time. And then we didn't get that nostalgic feeling that we had for characters such as Steve Rogers and also Tony Stark. Now, what is the solution for this? Well, I think the solution for this right now is, I don't know. But that's not true. I think there is a solution. I think it's to cut down on some of the projects, create more interconnectivity for us to get to know characters on a dramatic level, where we are seeing multiple movies of these characters that will then bring us to a quote unquote endgame of sorts. We don't know a lot of these characters, and some of the movies were just one-offs, it seems like. I'm going to take a really great example, whether you love the movie or not. Eternals was a movie that introduced a whole slew of new characters, and just characters that are, it introduced the Celestials. But what happened at the end of the movie was something that was akin to a possible sequel to get to know these characters a little bit more, their plight, their trials and tribulations, but we never heard anything about these characters again. And it's been a couple of years where movies have come out since that time. Another movie that was absolutely phenomenal, my son and I really loved it, was Shang-Chi. Now, that movie was, I think, a beautiful introduction to a brand new character within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm pretty sure we are going to see that character again. But because the time span is taking a little bit too long, once we do see that character again, it's going to feel almost as if that character didn't really matter. Yeah. And the reason why is because there's so many different projects. It dilutes the emotional connection that you may have with the character because there's so many other things that are coming out. Now, the TV shows are very nice. They're great. But what they could have done was utilize brand new characters in the movies, have them make cameos in TV shows to then keep that connection brewing, right? That character development brewing a little bit more. Because it's not as if the characters or some of the TV shows do not affect the movies. I do believe that this was a genius move by Marvel, where you could watch a TV show and some of the story elements that developed within the shows then found its way into the movies. I think that was like genius. But why can't the opposite happen, right? And the opposite did happen. A lot of the MCU characters that we knew, such as Sam Wilson, uh, Bucky Barnes, found their way into Captain Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And we have WandaVision and we have other shows like that. But I felt like they almost had a ABC, right? Their bread and butter, for lack of better words, but then they diverged a little bit far. And there were some great one-off projects. I'm not going to say that there some of these one-off projects that were part of the quantity did not pan out too well. Some really did. For example, Werewolf by Night. Werewolf by Night was pretty much an hour time span, and we got introductions to some characters, and it was great. It was great. Now, will we see these characters again? We're not too sure. But they ended it in a way where you were okay with them not showing those characters again. We just got to see elements within the Marvel Cinematic Universe or just Marvel itself. They didn't try to connect it with something else, right? And the reason why I'm having a gripe with the quality is because there are a lot of quantity based, I guess, projects that they released that made it seem like they were gonna connect with something else. And this is because the MCU in its origins basically ended with end credit scenes that allowed us to know that it's gonna be interconnected. Something is brewing. But for example, going back to the Eternals movie, well, we had at the end we saw Star Fox. We saw Star Fox. We saw the end of Icarus, but we also saw a celestial just basically bounce, right? And he took a couple of the Eternals, and then some of the Eternals that were still on Earth, well, went off to go find their family, for lack of better words. And then we had other projects like the Multiverse of Madness. We saw Clea and we saw Doctor Strange. Okay, towards the end, and going back to the I keep going back to the Eternals because it happens to be a really big movie that is not talked about, and it doesn't feel like Marvel is going to go back into exploring it. At the end we saw Black Knight, or at least the sword, but we knew who was going to become Black Knight, but we also heard the voice of Blade. Now, I did hear a whole bunch of I read a whole bunch of tweets in saying that they're gonna remove that connection with Blade and also Black Knight because we may not see Black Knight in the future. It's like, well, why did you even, you know, what was it, right? What was it that decided that factor? Was it because the Blade lost their original writer, or was it because the MCU is trying to analyze everyone's attention span, what they're into, and now deciding to go back on the possible introduction for a character? I think they just needed to stay to plan and not let the shifts in the pandemic and also the loss of uh, actors that passed away kind of shift their way of thinking too much, because now what we're getting is unorganized storylines that are all over the place. Now, I might be wrong. Since the introduction of Kang, we may get some kind of interconnectivity, but I find it very hard to believe that we're going to get Kang, but we're also going to go back and explore the Tiamat, the celestial whose hand is literally, or body is halfway purging through the earth. Or we're going to see the celestial who came to the planet, basically looked at everyone on the whole entire planet, talked to and took a couple of Eternals and then left, and no one is going to say anything about it. But I could be wrong. Maybe we're going to get the Marvels and they might explore something of that nature. But it does seem like there's a lot going on with nothing going on. Now, the only thing that I think that I'm seeing at this point would happen to be um, the whole Kang, the introduction of Kang. I loved it, and here's why. Some people didn't enjoy Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I'm not too sure why. And this is how I know attention spans are changing. I'm not too sure what they were looking for, right? I think they were looking for Kang to be this ultimate beast that rivals Thanos, but I, I didn't expect him to be in the movie for him to just decimate everyone and then leave. Well, maybe I did in some respects, but the plot that they explored within Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was a great introduction to the character. But we knew this character was coming. We knew he was coming because, well, if you watched Loki on Disney Plus, we saw the transition, right? The transition into what um, Sylvie did, right, at the end, and how it opened up doors for Loki to make, well, for Kang and others to make their way, right? So as you can hear, I sound all over the place, and that's because the MCU right now is all over the place. How can they fix this? Well, just stay to course. Right now, it's just stay to course. Of course, I know that there's going to be unexpected that happens, but like people are excited for like the X-Men and things of that nature coming out. And in my head right now, I'm like, how? How? I have my theories. I've had my theories for a long time on how they could introduce the X-Men, but things are so all over the place right now that I think if they were to bring in the X-Men at this point, something is going to get watered down, of course. It's either they introduce the X-Men right now, replace anything that has to do with Avengers-based characters, and just explore that for the next decade, or they introduce both and then one of the two gets watered down. And that includes shows too, as well, right? It's just a lot happening where you can't put enough effort into a couple of projects where you're trying to splice just as much as you can into so many different projects. Now, on a grand scale, it does hit a lot of people's attention, but the question is, how long will it grab their attention? And I'm going to be super honest with you all. There's a Deadpool 3 movie coming out, and I am hyped to see it. And even though we're going to get Hugh Jackman as Wolverine again, it does lead back into what I was speaking about earlier when it comes to just cameo impressions, right? We're trying to get that instant gratification for the viewership, but then what happens when we see Hugh Jackman and then the movie ends? It's like, well, the question will be, was that movie really good? Or was it just eye candy for us to see a character? And then that's it. And I didn't even mention all the Sony stuff, right? With like Spider-Man and Morbius and Venom and all of that stuff, right? We had end credit scenes that were supposed to connect that are not going to connect, and they're not going to revisit anymore. One of the things that I thought for the black suit, the symbiote suit for Peter Parker, I think they did something really okay where they brought Venom into the MCU for a slight, I guess, second, and they left a piece of the symbiote there. And that could be something that's explored in a Secret Wars type thing or a Kang Dynasty, where we do see Spider-Man again, and he happens to get the suit from that one uh, symbiote blob, right? Or, yeah. And he gets it, and he has a black suit, and it's explored in that way. But my thing is, right, when it comes to Spider-Man, everyone on the Earth is supposed to not remember him anymore, right? So will the goal be for everyone to remember him again or not? And By the time they introduce Spider-Man again, for them to introduce a possible black suit, people might forget about the whole Venom thing, right? Him going to the MCU. Why? Because there have been so many projects that haven't had any thorough connections to each other than a broad connection to each other. Meaning that they were just connected because they're in the same universe. We saw a lot of end credit scenes, but none of the end credit scenes connected, like 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Not like when we saw Nick Fury coming into the MCU. He was literally talking to everyone until everyone was gathered together. We knew that was the connection piece. We knew he was the catalyst for the creation of the Avengers to come together, right? Now, the only other interconnectivity that I see that seems to be going really well, I must say, is for the presentation of the Thunderbolts. Yeah. Now, the character that's displayed in the comic books is Lady Hydra, and as she's played in the movies and in the TV shows, she has come up quite a bit. So when I see the Thunderbolts movie, or just the premise for the characters, all of those characters we have been introduced to at some point, because they were part of the legacy era where it led into Avengers Endgame. And I'm pretty excited for that movie out of the many that are coming out, because it feels like that's the one that connects back to the Avengers. Now, some of those characters, I must say, have overlap of abilities, right? Superhuman strength, peak human strength, durability, enhanced senses, things of that nature. But I'm going to feel good seeing a lot of them. For example, Ghost. We haven't seen Ghost since Ant-Man 2. We're going to see Ghost, right? Now in the Black Widow movie, we did see a couple characters. And because those introductions of those characters, we're going to see them in the Thunderbolts. But here's the thing. Black Widow's sister, Yelena, we saw her in the Hawkeye TV show. So the distance between seeing the characters wasn't that far off, right? I think we're like, oh, she's going to take over. We loved her character in Hawkeye. We loved her character. She was, to be quite honest, in the Black Widow movie, Yelena was the spotlight of the movie. 100%. It was a story about her, and we saw Lady Hydra at the end of that movie. We saw her at the end of what's the name of this show? This Disney Plus show, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? Gathering people. She was in another movie too, as of recent. So she was in Wakanda Forever. There's so many things that she came up in, right? Lady Hydra, where she's gathering these characters together. That's very reminiscent to what Nick Fury did for the Avengers. Now, again, we'll see what happens. We'll see where this goes. But this could be the fall of the MCU if they don't stick to a plan. Whatever the plan might be. Because if the plan is to build up, they're going to get some hit or misses, right? But they're going to get hit or misses that have quality, connection, and then audience retention for. Because what will happen is that we're going to have movies where, yeah, they'll have end credit scenes that connect to each other, but then people will go back and see other movies because they feel lost in a story, in a book, right? What the MCU is doing right now is that they're making pretend that they're making multiple books, right? They're making multiple books where it takes a long time for a lot of these projects to come out, and some of these projects don't connect back into another 3 or 4 years. That's too much time for audience retention to remember all these characters. What they just need to do is make a movie, end credit scene. The next movie, end credit scene with characters from the first movie to then bridge it to the second movie, and then the third movie, and then the fourth, and then so on and so on and so on. Can they bridge it out a little bit farther? Yes, they can. And this is what I'm thinking could happen. There are multiple plot points that are happening right now within Marvel that either they're gonna have a couple of big events coming to the close of the next phase. We know Kang Dynasty is happening, but what if, right? What if the reason why they're doing so many different projects is because there are going to be multiple end games, quote unquote, end games coming out. Like we have Kang Dynasty, we have something else happening, and then we have something else happening. You know what I mean? So that's a possibility too. But the reason why I brought up all those points is because I didn't want it to seem like, well, the MCU is just losing their, I don't know, their what was good, their fire. A lot of things did happen. The pandemic, the passing away of a lot of actors, things of that nature occurred. The shift of attention span for viewership, the want of the old, so they introduce a lot of cameos, and those cameos only lead us to instant gratification, which doesn't stay too long, and then we get an overall movie that was lackluster. And now we have multiple projects, which can be good if there's a lot of good projects, but what we're seeing is a lot of projects and only a few are good. So let me know what you think about the MCU. Are you still invested into the MCU? I, for one, am still invested. Right? I'm a comic book lover, and I'm glad these movies are coming out. I just would hate for these movies to go away, right? Now, I must say, my attention span for some of these movies are going away too, but I'm still going to continue to watch them because I'm a diehard fan. And some people will argue and say, well, if you're a diehard fan, why are you critiquing? Because it's my opinion to critique the overall summary of what Marvel's been doing over the course of the years, the highs and the lows. And if we could get an understanding of the lows, then we could get back to the highs. And of course, Marvel's probably not going to listen to this, but if they do, or someone does, then they'll get a little bit of understanding onto a person's point of view for the rise and fall of the MCU. Because what I am really hoping for is for the rise, the fall, and then the rebirth of the MCU. But with that being said, everyone, this is Zen from Zen Multiverse, saying peace, love, and prosperity. If you're enjoying the content, you already know what to do. Share it, view it on all forms of social media. Well, not all, including YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. And yeah, I'll catch you all later for the next one. Later, everyone.